Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I'm James Hadley, Executive Director at Musical Theatre Network, and you are joining us for this panel, the first in a series of Creating Consciously. Tonight's discussion is going to be looking at inclusivity and trans identities and representation. And here at MTN, we were thrilled when Meg McGrady approached us about partnering on this series of discussions. Each panel discussion will look at a different area of inclusivity and identity over the weeks to come. And we've got the next one lined up on Wednesday, the 20th of July. We'll be having a discussion about queer identities and representation and inclusivity within musical theatre and theatre. As you'll know, many of you joining us, Musical Theatre Network is focused on musical theatre, but we thought for these discussions, it's really great to broaden it out to the performing arts in general. So we'll be talking about all the performing arts as well as musical theatre. It won't be exclusively musical theatre in these discussions. And we're particularly thrilled when Meg has approached us because we've been having more and more of these discussions when we had our higher education roundtable earlier this year, for instance. So much of the discussion was from course coordinators and students wanting to talk about how we're evolving the discussion about how best to teach both the classic musical theatre texts, but also with contemporary musical theatre, how best to make sure that in courses we are making sure the content, the new writing content that students are getting to work with is representative of the roles that are most relevant to them and representative of the things that they want to be engaging with in terms of representation within musical theatre. We've seen a wonderful growth in the diversity of who's writing musical theatre and who's telling whose stories over recent years. And it feels like with all the artistic growth, some of the mechanisms for how we talk about some of the approaches to rehearsing and staging some of the content needs to do a bit of a catch up in places. I know there's lots of great questions and discussion points planned for tonight. For those of you watching live, as you'll know if you've joined us for any past online panels, please just put any questions you have at any point in the discussion into the chat on YouTube, prefaced with the word question in capital letters, and we'll make sure to forward that on to Meg as our chair of the discussion and to our panelists. So without further ado, I'm really delighted to pass you on to the first of our Creating Consciously panels chaired by Meg McGrady.
Hello, my name is Meg McGrady. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a composer, producer, activist. I have too many things, like everyone, I wear many hats. But one of them is that I'm really, really interested in how we can work to better create consciously in this industry. To start off this panel, I'm going to give some very, very basic trans terminology so we don't have to keep repeating ourselves. So just to say that trans is an umbrella term for anyone who does not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Cisgender, if it comes up, refers to someone whose gender identity is the same as the gender they were assigned at birth. Non-binary is a term used to describe people who lie outside of the gender binary. In other words, outside of male and female. It can be an umbrella term or a separate identity altogether. And also the AMAB means assigned male at birth, and AFAB means assigned female at birth. With that said, just to say what I look like, I am an androgynous white human wearing a purple top shirt and with shaved short brown hair. And with that, it's time to introduce you to the rest of our lovely, lovely panel. So I'm going to first start by passing to Jessica. Just give us a little bit about yourself, your pronouns, and what you look like.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jess. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a former professional ballet dancer with lots of major companies and a musical theatre performer as well. I've sort of turned trans art consultant these days, which is an interesting thing to be doing right now in the UK. But I feel I'm making some progress. I am a feminine white person. I have sort of medium length red hair. I'm wearing a green headscarf and a grey sweater, and I'm sitting in a room filled with plants.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm now going to pass to Joy.
Hi everyone, my name is Joy. I use they, them pronouns. I would say that I am an interdisciplinary performer with a current speciality and focus on musical theatre. Previous focuses that I will come back to eventually do include playwriting and aerial arts. In terms of my image description, I am a Chinese Singaporean, but I'm a Chinese human wearing a dark forest green tank top with shoulder-length black hair and round glasses, and I am sitting in my kitchen.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm now going to pass to Preston.
Hello, everyone. Preston, I use he, him pronouns. I am kind of mostly a musical theater writer, but playwright also. And then I was still doing some work in film and TV, but that's kind of new for me. So just trying to fling a lot of stories in a lot of directions and work with community as much as possible. And often, end up as one of or the only trans voice in the room for a lot of processes. So very excited to be here and sharing this space. And if I think of anything else I do eventually, I'm sure that'll come out. And as a description, I am a white trans man with short brown hair and a brown chin strap beard. I am wearing a pink t-shirt in my den surrounded by like musical instruments, and I have part of a cat that you can see in my arms who is sleeping very comfortably. Here she is. Now you can see the full cat for folks who are able to, and yeah, she is the light of my life. So I'm glad she is joining us today as well. Thank you.
I am also incredibly glad that this cat is joining us. Hero, we love you. And finally, to pass to Amber.
Hi everyone, my name is Amber. I use they, them pronouns. I am a director and writer and like lazy researcher of PhD things. The pandemic has made me lazy is what I'll say. I trained as a musical theatre performer as well, and then decided that behind the other side was better for me. I am a mixed race, like Caribbean Scottish person with ombre brown to blonde hair. I'm wearing a lime green Nike jumper, and my backdrop is my wonderful flatmate Tabby Lamb's upcycled bookcase wall, and I'm sitting in my living room.
Thank you so much. And sadly, we were meant to have the wonderful Matt Powell joining us, who sadly could not make it, but we will be feeling the spirit of Matt as well. All right, so to begin with, I want to start with something a bit more positive, and I wanted to talk about when have you felt most welcomed in a theatre setting as a trans person, and how can we emulate that or reproduce that in theatre in the future? Basically, what makes you feel welcome? I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Right, I have ADHD, so I'm going first then. I think what made me feel the most welcome is this particular interaction I remember having actually during a break in a rehearsal, where I was in a cafe with someone who I had just started working with. It had been maybe 2 or 3 days of formally knowing him in a professional context, and he's just turned 60. And he's a straight white man, and he bought me a brownie, and he said to the cafe worker, I think they'll be having the brownie. And it was the most natural thing in the world. It was, I know definitely that he had to think about that, but the way he delivered it was the sort of like, this is how I should be using their pronouns, as opposed to like, hey, look at me, I'm using pronouns. And honestly, like, that just made me feel so safe and so at home in that particular company, in that particular space, and I still do work with that company. And yeah, exactly that. Someone else talk, please.
I have to agree and say that like pronoun introductions for me are one of like the greatest things. Like just having people use your pronouns and regularly checking in. I'm currently on a course called Theatre and Social Change at Rose Bruford, and every single session when we have someone new in, we sit down and reintroduce ourselves with our pronouns, and it's so natural and people's pronouns sometimes shift, and that's like, we don't comment upon that, we just kind of embrace it and keep carrying on.
Like, I remember meeting you at TVC, Meg, and I think one of the things that really stuck out to me was that when I met you for the first time, you said, I'm Meg, I use they, them pronouns. And it had never occurred to me, firstly, like, to be that ballsy, and secondly, that was like, yeah, I mean, maybe just that. And now I've started doing it, so thanks for that.
Good, I'm so glad to hear that. Does anyone else have anything else they want to say?
I'll see. I haven't been really around much community in the last couple years. I moved states in 2020, and I'm still kind of building my community here. So I don't have any like super recent experiences. Nothing bad theatrically. Some rough other experiences. But when I first came out as trans, I did a concert where I was going to announce like my name change and kind of my transition, because at that point I'd had shows and my name, I did want to kind of state that in the way that I did, and I decided that I was going to announce it then. So all of the PR was my old name, and then in the room I like kind of just showed up, was like, hey, this is actually the name. All the programs on the table had the right name, and all the performers, no performer had, they were all super celebratory to be there. And it was just really lovely. It was a room of people who didn't even expect it to be a very trans event. And it was really special that was kind of the reception that I got in my transition right at the start of it. And I think it gave me so much inspiration to keep going like through the particularly really difficult things that I'm embroiled in now, because I know that there is I've had such an effortless support system who yes ands like anytime. So I'm really grateful for that.
That makes total sense. Jess, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna just add another little thing. Like I remember when I did Cats the last time I did Cats, and this was nearly 10 years ago now. Right at the start of my transition, I wasn't even really out, full time as it were. And I was sort of just beginning my sort of journey, and I was sort of trying out new names, trying out like the first baby steps of an identity while I was at work. And I remember that like I was expecting it to be this whole thing, and I was ready to, what we're like sometimes, we kind of hedge our bets, and sometimes we want to go, oh yeah, it doesn't matter if you get it wrong, or don't worry if you don't feel like, and you want to give people an out sometimes, because we tend to be too nice. But the entire company just switched name immediately, like it was nothing. This was 10 years ago, like it was, this is like right at the beginning of really getting into the nitty gritty of these like conversations. And I remember this older gentleman who was in the cast. He was an older cis gay man, and like he was just like so forthright with using it, and he would like always use my name to my face. He'd like look me in the eye and say it. It wasn't any kind of nervous thing. He didn't feel weird about it. He didn't make it awkward. He just like changed the name and was confident about it, right? And like made it feel organic, as opposed to this like weird thing that they're doing. And it didn't feel like an exception or something an extra, right? It just felt like the day before, just as normal.
Yeah, that is basically what I'm hearing from a lot of this, is that we really just appreciate when people remember our names and pronouns, and like as basic as that might be, just when those things change, just taking them, and if you mess up, say sorry and carry on. But like, is there anything anyone else wants to add before we move on to the next question, or are we all good?
I just another little nugget of information. I think one, I started a rehearsal process, and right at the beginning, when we were kind of talking about like the vision for the show and like what we all wanted to achieve, the director, who is a cis woman, had a conversation with everyone in the company, including like wider team from the organization and stuff like that, about the importance of using pronouns. And like immediately kind of took the ownership and the responsibility off the trans people in the room. And that's the first time that that's ever happened to me. And I was literally just like, I remember coming away from that conversation and I was just like, oh my, like, it just felt so much easier to, and like there was going to be less of a battle from the trans people in the room to kind of make, you know, just like to try and explain or educate or whatever, like whatever the kind of expectation is from us. But that was just how I think all rooms should be started. And also the fact that it hadn't come off the back of a conversation from a trans person, that was the director's decision to make everyone feel welcome, and like everyone with like large like shiny bright lights. Because yeah, it felt like a lot easier, and like that the big worry for me was like already kind of dismantled from that conversation. It was good.
It's just knowing that you have support in that room, and it can just be those simple things of taking the initiative to start that conversation before it comes up. Yeah, I totally agree.
On that same thread as well, like when we did Inked, for those that don't know, Meg and I just finished doing at the end of last year a piece of theatre called Inked, which is all about, you know, it's basically a big lovely trans story. But Caitlin, our assistant director, she, from the word go, from the audition day for when we auditioned the male lead, and right up until the final day, there was no question in my mind that she was up to bat for me, right? Every single step of the way. Like the job was kind of secondary almost to this, like that was her priority. Like if we had spent 10 days rehearsing, we didn't have a show, but I had been made safe or protected from harm or blah, 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 that was a success criteria. And so like the work sort of became secondary to the knowledge that she is going to be ferocious and come up to bat for me every dang step of the way. And it was interesting because like white cis women for trans women can be quite a dangerous demographic, I find. And Caitlin just totally was like, I hear that and I see that. I'm going to do absolutely everything in my power to not be that. And it wasn't virtue signally, if you want to use that. It wasn't like just doing it for clout or, you know, to look good. I knew like right from the word go that she was gonna, she'd claw someone's face off if they came at me with something. And that knowledge and that security, exactly the kind of thing that we just spoke about, right from the get-go, I knew. And that was big.
And that production in general was a really, really lovely space while it was led, like while there was a lot of cis voices in that room who initiated this production. As soon as there was trans people in the creative team, there was trans people in the on stage performing. I was a composer on that project, and it just felt we were held every step of the way. And also they did things as part of that which were really, really useful. Like they had gender training as part of that, so the conversations weren't on us to teach everyone in the company this is what trans means. No, it was kind of a part of it from the get-go.
Yeah, that was huge. Just the fact that Chris, the director, just immediately said, right, everybody involved is going to get training, trans 101, like, so we can just totally take that weight off the trans people's involved shoulders. And I think that sort of came up before, like taking that onus off of us to have to just like, train people and support people's learning every step of the way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to our next question. This is going to be a really, really big question, and maybe it needs breaking down even a bit more, but I'm curious, what steps do you think that people can make when they're auditioning trans people, when we've got trans people in the rehearsal room? How can we make sure that we are welcoming people? And this is kind of related to the previous question, but beyond just doing pronouns or trans training, is there anything else that hasn't come up yet that you're like, that should be included? Preston?
I think that, I'm very excited to hear everyone's answers, because I think every time we collaborate on this, there's like always such exciting stuff. I'm like that. I think like one thing is breaking down the binary of auditions and just discontinuing that vocal calls and just removing those words and that way of thinking. But something to to me that like it's hard to discuss like those things because they're like, that's actually like possible to do and somewhat easy to do if you decide to. But it really takes like doing internal work to change your brain, like, and how you see people, because you can decide to make those choices and still be like, well, I still see this person this way and I still see this person this way. When people are coming in rooms and being like, I'm accommodating them in the physicality of what I did. And that is not unhelpful, but I think a lot of it is not feeling like doing the work to not feel inconvenienced by that, to not feel like you're making some sort of special effort for trans people, to feel like that is your responsibility to do that work. It's your responsibility to go home and practice people's pronouns and go home and not just be like, I'm doing this and I'm doing this pronoun because this person is asked, but to really understand the connection between identity, and that even if you're seeing things binarily, it's your job to work through that and to deconstruct that and see people without that involved, and without your filter of experience that you place over them, even while taking some of those right steps. So a lot of internal journeys, I think, need to be happening.
Basically, all these things should be happening even when there aren't trans people in the room. Introducing pronouns should just be a new norm. And I totally agree on the, like, we've got a question about transposition and all the vocal stuff later. So just hold thoughts on that. Anything else that anyone else wants to say?
I think as well, like, to add more onto that internal journey, I find that this is something I think about a lot in relation to the intersectionality between like being a minority in Britain and also like being non-binary in Britain, of like people who haven't lived through the same experiences as you or don't have the same sort of because we see the world through a really queer perspective, right? And that queerness and that changes our paradigm shifts, and like we start thinking like, oh, it's if you're not used to having someone with they them pronouns in the room, you go home and practice. And like I think that's something that how do I say this, like I think that is something that doesn't occur to some people, especially if they haven't lived the same life. And like that's not bad, that's not wrong, it's just being open to realizing that other people like live different lives from you, and that if you go home and you practice pronouns for a weekend, that isn't going to be as much of an inconvenience as it feels like it might be at the very start before you do it. Like can make such a big difference. Google as well, like same as if you don't know how they them fits grammatically in sentence, if you don't know where Singapore is, you can actually Google it, and it's something that a lot of people don't think about if they've never had to live through that themselves, which is again not bad, not good, it just is.
It's that lack of continuous learning. Like people don't realize that even after school ends, in life, when you're meeting new people, you're going to be continuously learning about different cultures, different environments, different people's life experience. And just embracing that and going, oh, I'm going to do a quick Google of some trans 101 or something like that.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. Oh, sorry, Jess.
No, you go straight ahead.
No, yeah, it's short and sweet. That was going to be my answer. Is Google's free? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I think also like just taking away this idea that being trans is a new idea. If you used Google, then you would understand that it's not. So it's not like this kind of new millennial thing that's just come in. Sorry, that's like just emerged into the public eye. Like it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years and was standard practice in some areas of the world before now. And I think that the if the steps are not done before someone gets into a room, that's where the problems lie, because it will always fall on the trans people to have to even like the kind of act of explaining what the issue is should have been done before you welcomed a trans person into the room, because I think that there are so many people that end up having damaging experiences on jobs and in processes if they if they are constantly having to educate and constantly having to define their identities because someone else has not done the work beforehand, it's like this kind of, yeah, I think like just casting a trans person or just having a trans person on the creative team, the work doesn't stop there, is basically what I'm trying to say. And if the belief is that the work does stop as soon as you have someone that you can look to, that's where the problems arise. So just making sure that the work is done before you come into the room, or yeah.
Just a springboard off that, because that's a beautiful like point. And I just think that we should be expecting there to be a trans or non-binary person in the room every time, even if there isn't one, or there, nobody's been actively presented as a trans or non-binary person. It's just like, we should be expecting there to be one or two or three, you know what I mean? And like, and if that expectation is there, the work should already have been done. Like you said so eloquently, Amber, like the work should have already been done. And that way there's no doubt in anyone's mind that when we come on to another thing that I'm sure we'll talk about, which is just putting trans folks in the work period, like there will be no question that the work has been done and it's a safer environment. If not a safe environment, it will be safer.
Totally. And also, even if you think you're starting with like a cis company, if you create a welcoming environment, you might have someone come out as trans halfway through a production. Speaking of thinking about how we adapt transness into the canon, what is the best way to adapt traditionally gendered roles, which is probably most roles, let's be honest, for trans performers? How do we make sure that we use the existing canon to our advantage? And this could be things like, how do we approach transition of songs? How do we adapt gendered language for like gender neutral performers? And how do we make sure that like performers feel comfortable with those adaptations as well? I'm very big. I ask a lot of big questions and then just like drop it to see what people think.
I'm going through this now, like myself with a project. Kind of, first of all, like one thing I just want to say is like, I think I see people or productions who like are really patting themselves on the back about doing some things, but not creating healthy spaces in the room. And so that's something that I just want to say, if that's something that you're experiencing in your company, as like a cis person, like the PR is like, look, we really we did something super cool and new, and we've made this so diverse, and then the room is like really toxic. You haven't necessarily done what you thought you did, but I appreciate that a lot of people are probably working on that and trying. But I think for that, there's just like, there's not a whole lot of excuse, and there's some specific cases where that can be explored, but to not simply look at re-exploring the music or the keys. And so to offer something I'm doing right now is I have a score that was not written super inclusively. And that probably does not allow a lot of vocal types to participate. And that's not what I want from the show. And so I'm not licensing it until I can figure out how to have alternate vocal lines. Or be like, you can like swap out with this character or this line, or you can just sing this other vocal line and have those options. So if like transposing the song as a whole isn't realistic for whatever reason, there's a ton of options. Like if a note gets too low, you can pop that note up. Like there's no reason to like not cast people in roles because you couldn't change like a few notes. Like to me, I think there, like I said, maybe some very specific cases, but kind of as a whole, yes, anding that stuff and being really on your feet about that stuff means so much. And you're opening yourself up to so many wonderful people that you could work with, and so many like wonderful opportunities that you yourself, like as a cis artist, can have by expanding your ability to think about how you see these roles and characters. So that's something I feel very strongly about. And in terms of script, I'm still kind of figuring out like, and I think talking to people about how, we want to acknowledge that make pronouns comfortable in a script. So if the pronouns are not the actors, does there want to be a version of the script maybe that uses different pronouns that are more comfortable for the actor to read in the stage directions? That might not be everyone's preference, but that might be some people's preference. So I really want to explore that and do more research and be like, can I make my stage directions more inclusive? Can I have alternate versions of certain scripts where characters are non-binary who are cis in this case, but does that have to be the case in every licensable version? Can I actually have different editions available? So that's kind of what I'm exploring right now, and I'm feeling optimistic about it, and I hope that a lot of other people do too.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like scripts, I always put like characters' pronouns in there, but also I equally will always add a little addendum at the bottom being like, we live in a beautiful, lovely, diverse world. Please feel free to change this. And I think sometimes just putting that there will make it easier. I don't know how licenses work all the time, but I feel like adding that there might make it easier in the future for people. And equally about transposition, I'm a big believer in people are always to say to me, but if you transpose something or if you change a note, then you're changing the author's intention. And I don't care personally at all about that as a composer. So I don't understand, people are like, it's changing the intention, but no, you're just giving something a new life and a different lens to look through it with.
Yeah, that work about that phrase about different lenses, I really resonate with. Even in the canon, the legit canon pre-1965, you see all that. You have those legit songs in different keys, like Love Look Away is both in C and A or something. Don't fact check me on that. Definitely in C. But yeah, I think what's really interesting about those different lenses and putting additional filters on stuff by incorporating transness into the work is that I think trans communities and minority communities as a whole deserve stories both that center their queerness or their perspectives, and also stories that have very little to do with it. I think we deserve to have a wide variety of both good and absolutely crap stories told about us, so that yardstick isn't so high that we could start lambasting every story in the small canon that we can have for not, you know what I mean? Because you get all those rom-coms which are just awful, and nobody goes up to them and goes why isn't there a trans person in this? But then when you try your best to make the most inclusive story ever, it's that there are so many issues that in the world that you're not going to be able to give equal emphasis in all of them. And I think having that ability, I've gone on a tangent here, but I think having that ability to be able to fail and fail forward to widen the range of what you can do in specific spheres is really important. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything they want to say on this? Jess?
Yeah, just to go off on another different tangent. I come from a very physical dance-based background, and it's a whole other side of the conversation that I think gets overlooked a lot. My theory on that is because it's the actual act of trans people really taking up actual space and moving in actual space. And I think that's quite offensive to a lot of people from these archaic institutions, musical theatre, dance theatre generally. But I think that us kind of I wrote a whole article about this, but unshackling dynamic from gender, you know what I mean? So we're focusing more on dynamic words, the way that we perform. Our job is essentially to tell stories and communicate information in some way or another. That's our job. And I think that focusing on reductive things like, gender, whereas actually we should be looking at telling a story and the dynamic in which you do so, I think that's more important. And I guess to sum it up, it's language, right? And, it comes all the way right back to the beginning and training. I think if we diversify training and we right from the get-go just say, right, we're not going to do men's work and women's work. Women aren't just going to do the point work and men are not going to just do virtuosity. We start to really diversify the way that we show dancers and performers in general. yeah, focusing on those dynamic words.
And I would just say, I would really recommend that article that you've written, because it brings up a lot of great points about how we could move language to more things, like rather than male or female, to athletic and lyrical, I think was it. I think that was right.
Yeah, that's an example that I pulled right from the Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing frameworks. In there, they have a type of dance called classical Greek, which is very, not that well known, but it has two very distinct kind of pathways with little branches off each one, labeled athletic and lyrical. And, it's quite a simplistic, kind of like infant version of what we could be capable of. But it essentially, when you tell a story, let's say, oh, you're a gladiator in an arena, so it's going to feel more athletic, and you give it that kind of label. Oh, but now you're a wood nymph down by the stream, and it's going to have more lyrical aspects to it, as they put it. And actually the Imperial Society, has so many flaws in that little institution, but they have begun on my recommendation to branch out with that kind of language into the rest of their syllabi and all the genres that they encompass in dance and theatre. So it seems to be working, ? Yeah.
Any final points before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, like, in recent, just like what I've heard from on the grapevine, like there's definitely been a shift in kind of commercial casting directors seeing a lot more trans people for traditionally cis roles, but but I think that it feels as though from the outside, it feels as though they're seeing all of these trans people for traditionally cis roles so that they can say, well, they can't sing it in the original key, so, well, let's not employ them then. And I think that there's like a lack of acknowledgement that almost the entire musical theatre canon has been written for cis performers. But then we have, you have seen with things like the revival of Company that, yes, we can transpose an entire musical and completely shift but we're not going to do it for you. We just want to have you in the room and then not actually go any further. And I think that, in my experience, that comes from just a lack of conversation. Like, if you just speak to trans people and ask what their vocal range is, ask what they're comfortable in. It feels like there are such easy steps in some situations that are just missed, and it's just kind of like, oh well, they won't be able to sing that, so we'll just like, that'll just be it, and we'll find some boring cis white man to go and do a role written for a trans person. But and like, I think that the transposition of even like what you were saying, Preston, about like a couple of notes, it feels like that is such a kind of grotesque undertaking for the artist's work, when actually it's just, like they changed Carrie Hope Fletcher's opt something in Heathers because it was more comfortable for her to not do what was written in the score. Like, it can be done, and it's not. And I think that, like, at the heart of it, it's that in like commercial musical theatre, we're still in a place where we see casting trans people as being like this revolutionary, like, show-stopping thing, and they must be put there to be a spectacle. And it's like, I think that there are like a lot of layers that need to be broken down in order to just to just kind of have a non-binary audition process that is timely. And I think that those, when the idea of transness is not placed on situations, it's already being done. But I think that it's like the idea of casting trans people is seen as this big shift, when actually it's the same kind of allowances that we have for big names and for other situations. So I think that it just needs to, it's not that deep, is what I will end my tangent on. It's not that deep.
Exactly. Also, opt should always be there just for vocal health in general. Not everyone's going to be able to hit top notes Also, we got a lovely question from the chat during that from Jane. I don't know if anyone, I definitely have no experience of this, but I'd be interested to know if anyone does. What can we do about right holders who won't give permission for non-binary casting? E.g., you can cast a male identifying actor in a female role, but characters must be played as intended. So essentially, what do we do when rights holders say you can't have that kind of casting? Or does anyone have, there might not be anyone on this panel who'd know that, but I would be interested if, I'm sure there is, I know that MMD and MTN have worked with legal experts before who might be able to know better than us. If no one has an answer, we shall move on. Oh, Preston?
I have a clarification. Is it the discussion of like, the person just has to be comfortable playing like the gender of the character, or is it like to reimagine the gender of the character? I think that's my question, because I can see some like response to like, as long as the actor is comfortable playing this character, this is the character and this is how the character identifies. Like I see kind of, but being like, you can't cast certain people in this role. In that case, I'm like, whoever is trying to license that show, whoever has the most power in that situation, I would advise to kind of fight back against that and be like, that's unacceptable. You know, I would advise against, you know, not that anyone's asking me, but like licensing that show, maybe if there's already hostility going in there and certain people who are not allowed to be involved fundamentally. But it does seem like that might be more case by case.
Mm-hmm. I think specifically looking at it, it's asking about changing characters' genders within the script.
Well, I still feel like that's going to be really case by case, because I feel like there's probably a lot of, especially newer writers or newer shows that would be at peace with that. And maybe if the discussion was had more and writers who are comfortable with that were more vocal and were more interested in that and included notes in their scripts, that would influence the people who aren't, because I think that'd be great. I'm in full support of that.
I don't fully understand the question, but Jane, I hope this helps. When I was in uni, I played Giuseppe Zangara in Assassins by the Stephen Sondheim guy. He's kind of indie, don't know if you know him. I wasn't out back then, and they'd just cast me in the role for, you know, like there was a class of us and we all needed roles in something or other. Yeah, I was very much masquerading as a cis woman in year 3. And they just kind of did exactly what Preston and I think Jess was talking about earlier, about just like, we did it in the original key, and we adapted a lot of Mr. Sondheim's work for me to be able to sing it. And just on the case by case basis thing, I don't really believe we needed to go to the people licensing that work to ask for permission to do that, because it was in a school environment, and it was something that kind of just had to be done because I had a mezzo-soprano voice, and Giuseppe Zangara was not written for mezzo-soprano. And for that, it was just someone who looked female, or well, DFAB playing someone who historically is a cis man. Hope that helps. Like in some environments, that is something that just happens without publisher approval.
To move on to our next question, I want to know what people think about gendered awards ceremonies, and how can we better include non-binary people within that? Is it a case of, and I've been having this conversation recently with my sister as well, who has different opinions to me, which is exciting. Do we abolish gendered categories altogether, or do we create specific categories for non-binary performers or characters?
I try to understand why award ceremonies are binary in the first place. And when I think about that, because I understand being like, abolish the binary, and people are like, what? No. But then I'm like, why is it? Like, why is that happening in the first place? Like, why are they like, men act good here and women act good here? Like, why is that even happening? So that's, I think, the start of that question for me. And then, yeah, like, nominate 10 people, put them in the same group, do groups of 5, be like, this is the first half of the year, the shows that were there, this is the second half. I think there's just different ways to organize it. It doesn't super make sense when you look deeper, I think, as to what's even going on there.
At the end of the day, award ceremonies are mostly to give press for shows as well, so like also that comes into question. The argument I will say that I've heard for having a non-binary category is it will encourage people to write more non-binary roles or hire more non-binary people, but equally then does it become tokenistic? So it's a lovely big confusing pile.
Every time that this conversation's come up, I've gone away like more confused than I started. Like it's so nuanced, so many avenues of exploration and inquiry. And I just feel like every time we have this chat, we struggle to agree, I think, on a lot of things, which is, it's going to happen because we're an incredibly diverse group of people. And like, I think it must have been very necessary to introduce, like a best actress, kind of thing at some point, because I imagine that, when women in the world were having an even harder time than we are now, I think it was probably necessary. But I think, not to say that, patriarchy's done now, like we're good, like not saying that, but like, I feel like maybe we can look at that success, right, and go, well, actually, maybe we should take it a step further, as opposed to thinking of it as a removal. I think maybe to think of it as an expansion. And I think you're quite right, Meg, when you said, it might encourage, if we added maybe a non-binary category, it might encourage more roles to come for non-binary folk, but also at the same time, sweep it off the table and go best in a comedy, best in a a tragedy, best in a blah blah blah. Maybe that would be more logical. But yeah, see, now I'm all confused. I've confused myself again because I'm just like, so many avenues. But that's my kind of vague input, I guess.
I think one thing that most people can agree, though, is something needs to change. At least that's one thing that I feel like, yeah, you're all nodding. Like something needs to change there, but it might take us a while to figure out what works best. But any other points? Yep, Amber.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar to you, Jess. I often like talk myself into knots about it because I'm like, well, this must be the bit, and then I have so many conversations, and like the solution is just kind of swimming around. But I think at the I think that encouraging people to write more non-binary roles, because when I think about like, oh well, yes, let's make 3 categories, and then I'm like, so I can probably count on like half of one hand how many non-binary characters I could, or like non-binary people that I could draw upon to be nominated. And then I was having a conversation with someone earlier on today actually about like the fact that then forces, then it creates a binary for that, and has like this midsection of which is also not useful. And then I think another tangent that I'd gone on was like, well, we'll have the same amount of people that are nominated for the traditionally gendered categories, just in like a leading role in, and then there'll be like a limit on the amount of like cis men that you can nominate for the category. And then I was just like, but then that's also I think it is a really difficult discussion and situation that I do not have the answer to, but have also tied myself up in knots and would agree that something needs to change, because having non-binary people lumped into a gendered category is not helpful for anyone at all, and shouldn't happen. So yeah, I think something needs to change, but unfortunately cannot offer the answer as to what.
I too cannot offer the answer because I think I've seen one award ceremony in my life that wasn't like a sports day ceremony. I just kind of forget that they happen, and then they're gone, and I'm like, oh, this person won that, great. I think there is something to be said about, like, it's obvious that the people in this Zoom room right now, like, we all like, here are multiple different solutions that may or may not work. I think it's also good to add that, like, trying something and having it not work is better than not doing something. because once you have something that doesn't work, then you have 999 other ways left to try something else. And until we start making steps towards change, whether that first step is tokenistic or not, will lead us towards a second step, which is less tokenistic, or less like, and also you're gonna have like people criticizing it no matter what. I don't mean like the trans community, I just mean in general, like anyone has like the ability to go on the internet nowadays and be like, that's pandering, or like, you've cast a trans person, that's gimmicky. So just something.
Totally agree. And those are all great points. I think we should move on to our next thing, which is, what advice or steps would you offer to a cis writer who wants to include a trans character within a show that they are writing? Someone who maybe has had no experience up to this point, but is interested in getting involved with this. Joy?
I am very passionate about this, just in terms of like my different intersectionalities. I think it's two very simple things. Number one, talk to trans people. Number two, pay them for their time. And like, it's just like something quite similar happened to me, but on a racial level, where I was just very, very aware that if I were to sit down and like have a really long talk about all the reasons why the Mandarin language does not work that way, you would have to pay me. And I think just coming into that expectation, knowing that you will have to fund someone for their experience if you do not have that experience, is something that you should write to the Arts Council about possibly funding, is just something to take into consideration. Because all of us understand the struggling income of an artist. We've all been there. But also, like, I personally am a very patient person. I will explain to you what they, them means till the cows come home, but that is really tiring. I pick my battles on what to get angry about and when someone misgenders me and when I should be like a bit pissed off. But there is a limit to how much I can take someone asking me why I'm non-binary yet don't look a certain way, or why I'm Chinese and I don't speak Mandarin well, you know? So there it is.
Yeah, I think like I think also like asking yourself why you're writing this trans character in. If you're writing them in so that you can ask a trans actor to perform trauma, and that's their only that's the only thing that they're gonna, that's their only service to the narrative, then I think, or even like this kind of cis martyr savior of trans people, then I don't think you're doing it for the right reasons. But also I think that if you're ready and willing to write a trans character that is nuanced and has a journey, then like, yeah, you need to pay trans people for their time and not try and impose that experience on someone. And also don't leave the onus on the trans actor to then be the ultimately be the dramaturg on your show that you've written from an outside perspective without consulting with trans people beforehand. And I think that it's like also just who are you, by you telling this story, who are you taking that voice away from? If you're gonna get verbatim from a trans person their experience to write this character, then should you not just let the trans person write the character? I think that being able to acknowledge that whilst you want to platform these stories, in doing that you need to take yourself out of the equation and let trans people tell their own stories. We've not got to a point where we can have, where we have enough platforms to share our own experiences yet. So I think that if that's the main question, you should be asking yourself why that is, and what, who you're taking away from and who you're giving to, and whether what you're giving is for the right reasons or whether it's for an outside purpose.
I have a lot of feelings on this I yes and to everything that's been said, like fully. And something that I usually like when asked this, the first thing I'll say is like, well, in many cases, just like take a character that exists in something you've written, or just like a person, and be like, and also they're trans. Like, don't change it. Like, if something specific is super, super incongruous, like obviously like adjust that by paying someone to help you. But like, just like, we're just people, and like we could be anyone in any script that you've already written. And if you haven't thought about that already, and you're writing a very specific trans story, but you haven't been able to see us as just people who are kind of just existing in a way you'd write any character, then I'm very much like, let trans people do that and interrogate why you're doing that. And I've had situations where I've read scripts and I've pointed out myriad ways in which it's dangerous, and then that hasn't stopped anything. And I go, you're 100%. To the point where I've been like, I don't think you're the people to tell this story. Like, I don't think you are. And then I've had some people that I've read and I've been like, great, here's a few things, and they've been really responsive. So it has been like writer to writer in terms of situation, but I'm always kind of start with like, if you have these qualms, especially if like you could skew, if you haven't totally interrogated why you're telling this story, just get to know, like, just put trans characters in things where it's not a big deal at all. And then further than that, like 100% like paid consult. I don't fight back with that consultation. Obviously work through things. I think a lot of people will hire consultation to say they've done it and then talk themselves out of why they need to take any of that advice. I think we've seen a lot of that certainly on Broadway recently in the experiences that I've had. Say you had help to say you had help and then not actually do anything. But yeah, I think get really used to just having trans people exist in your work in a way that doesn't feel like you're writing. I think a lot of people, this is so tricky to say. I think a lot of people like are trying to explore a trauma that they've never experienced. And they're like, oh, being trans, that I'm going to explore that trauma. That's going to be really raw and difficult for me as a writer. And I would caution against that if you catch yourself doing that. And it's not like a super judgment. I know we all want to explore experiences that we haven't had, and we all want to dig into those things, but sometimes it's just really not your place to do that. And unless you have so much money, and then just give it to trans people and do what they say.
That's the thing though, consultants shouldn't be there to teach you. They are not there to teach you. They are there to give literal advice on your script. So if you come at a consultation being like, I don't know anything about this experience whatsoever as well, like come into it knowing your basics, and then they are there to help with that nitty gritty of like that. Anything else before we move on?
I think, sorry, but I think as well, like just in general, if you are prepared from the outset to, if you come in with this mindset that you are not perfect and you have to be prepared both to be wrong sometimes and also to not get defensive about that, I think a lot of natural defensiveness comes up. And like a lot of it stems from a place of fear of like doing the wrong thing, and really like all of us want to be seen as a good person. Like I think we all understand that nobody wants to be seen as like transphobic or racist or whatever. And I think like interrogating that defensiveness and that fear of wanting to be and that need to be seen as a good person, and realizing that actually if you are prepared to like own up to your mistakes and to make mistakes and like to take responsibility for them in a way that does not place the onus on a trans person for forgiving you for that, you know what I mean? Then that will really increase a lot of empathy in this world, and that will really like help engender like communication, like strong communication.
To carry on from all of this and bringing consultation, when should you look to work with a trans consultant versus just having a casual conversation with a trans person? Where is that line, and when does that work involve a fee? And consultancy should always involve a fee, in my opinion.
I'm in full agreement. I think that consultancy should always involve a fee. And I think if you don't know the person you're approaching, it should be paid, no matter how much it is, no matter how small a chat it is, 10 minutes down the pub, you pay them in some form. And I say if you don't know them, because not that this kind of stuff should always be transactional, and friendship shouldn't be transactional, but if my mate asks me something about transness, they're my friend because they do other supportive things in my life, and they already do emotional labor to help and support me. So that's a kind of form of payment in a way. And I think that when some Johnny who I don't know comes into my email and said, I hear you're a consultant and I'm doing this show about trans trauma, can you talk to me about it? And they're like, meet me down the pub and we'll have a chat or buy you lunch. I'm like, no, pay me my consultancy fee, right? Because that is more than a lunch with a stranger can cover. So I think that, yeah, just to reiterate, if you don't know them, consultancy fee, and the fee that the trans person sets down is what it is. That's gospel, and that's what it's worth. That's what it costs to be trans inclusive. Boom, done.
Put your money where your mouth is. I'm a big believer that budgets should reflect a production, and that's one way that you can do it is by making sure that you're paying the people that you're talking to. Anything else anyone wants to add on that? Or we feel like we've nailed it. Got it. Oh, Preston?
I do work with like students or people who like don't have the ability to pay sometimes. And so I'm like, you can always exchange there's always some sort of exchange you can make peacefully and respectfully that can be offered, certainly. And tons of times I've said, oh, it's okay, actually, I can do this for you. I have that space right now. And sometimes I've said, no, I can't. But then I'm also like, if you can't pay, certainly if you're choosing not to pay, maybe that is a good indicator that it's not the time to tell that story. If you're not willing to put the work in and you really can't put the work in, even if you would mean well, maybe you're not ready to tell that story yet. And this is a great time to just have trans people peacefully and joyfully existing. I think that's a big thing is I don't know if I can't speak for everyone here, but a lot of times when I'm asked to consult, nearly all of it's to examine trauma in a piece. No one has ever been like, can you consult on this piece? I want to make sure I got all the happiness correct. And that would be a great consultation. I would love a consultation, but it is a good moment to be like, I'm just gonna know I'm writing a human being who's having the same experience as a human being, like that I'm comfortable writing for the rest of my characters. And if I hit a single question or something, we'll deal with it. But yeah, I think that's a good indicator that you're not ready for that story if you can't do the work.
I think equally as well, if you can't find, there are so many times that productions will be like, we couldn't find a trans person to play this character, then maybe that time now isn't the time for that production. If you couldn't find the person for that casting, like it comes back to like other aspects of the work as well. I think moving on, what is, and this is kind of like a final question for this big open section before we go to more like Q&A things that from the lovely people watching, is what is one thing people you wish people knew about being trans and working in your field? Like, if you could teach them one thing, you could take your time on that. Oh, yes.
Just a short moment while I reflect on some of this, like if you can keep a collaborator from being the only trans person in the space, and really, you don't need an excuse to hire trans people. You don't need the content to be trans. And especially like when it is, or your trans collaborator is dealing with stuff that is traumatic, and there's a lot of things that would have been really, really helpful. And I've expressed that it would have been really helpful and meaningful to have other people with my identity, working through that content with me. And it's not a reflection on anyone doing bad work or being unhelpful or anything like that, but it's just different and it is helpful. And it's really helpful for the mental health and for the process of the work.
100% agree. I feel like if you are only casting people in the front and have no one behind the scenes who is also trans, or if it's the other way around, it doesn't work. You need that ecosystem throughout a production. Any other thoughts from anyone?
Could you repeat your question really quickly?
Yeah, of course. So what is one thing you wish people knew about being trans and working in your field?
Thank you.
The struggle doesn't end at the theatre. I think that's a big one. Like, curtain doesn't come down and we go home and it's all okay. I think there's this, like, we touched on it. It kind of is a pervasive theme through everything we've spoken about today, about like performing trauma and just like being a little music box ballerina that spins on the trauma podium, right? And I think that it would be really helpful if a lot of our cis peers could understand that we go home and it still exists. Like, the things that we encounter still exist, and it's out of musical theatre fun, high kicking hat land, like it goes on. And I think that people forget that when we're in the midst of, especially telling trans stories, it's the kind of big drawback from telling a trans story with lots of cis people around. It's that they forget that the things that we've actually just performed or discussed, or we're in the writer's room or we're in the studio, the things we've just discussed are actual real things. They're not hypothetical choreography. They're things that are actually happening right out that door. So I think that is probably quite a good thing to reflect and remember on.
Yeah, I think like kind of going off the back of that, just like the issues that we raise both in a room and on stage are not minute, and they're not just being raised for the sake of it. Like, I think that the weight of the way that things are portrayed for trans people, and like the knock-on effect that has on how we're treated in society, is sometimes downplayed in a way that is dangerous. And so when a trans person feels safe enough to raise an issue in your rehearsal room, or in the pub after the show when you're talking about something, or in whatever situation, just know that like those that they're not just null issues or null things that we kind of throw into conversation just for the sake of it. Yeah, if I keep going, then I'm going to talk myself into a tangent that I won't be able to get out of, because my brain will stop making sense. So, au revoir.
I think as well, I mean, this specific speaking point is brought up a lot in trans communities. I don't know how much is brought up in cis communities. The graph of how left-handedness spikes after left-handedness stopped being banned. It just goes, and I think just like at the root of it, if I had to choose my one thing, it would be that that creating a safe space for people who are not like you, or who are not entirely like you, is going to be a lot less labor and a lot less inconvenience than it feels like. It's going to take a lot less money. It's going to take a lot less work than it looks like it will. And that is something that is going to bring a net good to the world, as opposed to create a net a net negative. And once you start doing that for other people, just in general, like, we're going to work towards like that's going to be a small step that creates a bigger step towards like making the world a better place. And yeah, just deciding for yourself, what is that one small thing I'm going to do when I am auditioning, when I'm casting? Is it that I'm going to be in a dance call and I'm going to say, this is option 1 and this is option 2, instead of this is the guy and girl part? Is it like not assuming someone's pronouns and also not forcing someone to share their pronouns if they don't want to? Just like, you can always do smaller things to create safety. And once that happens, everyone is going to feel a little bit better living and just existing.
Also, just like, you can, to add on to those small steps, if you're in a space which doesn't have gender neutral bathrooms and you're performing there for a bit, you can print out some gender neutral bathroom signs and stick them on the door because you are in that theatre. And equally, there have been great examples of, I know that Travis Alabanza, when they brought their show to the Bush, they had, as part of their contract, they were like, you have to, anyone who performs this show about transness has to make gender neutral bathrooms permanently in their theatre. And like there are little things like that that you can add in. Like you have power.
Can I just say also about the topic of bathrooms, if anyone is listening and owns a theatre and wants to make a gender-neutral bathroom, you also have to add a hygiene bin to the places that did not previously have one. Because I had my period the other day and there wasn't one, and when I tell you I was angry and in pain because the sign was gender-neutral and the bathroom was not. Please just do that. Like the bleeding people in your life will thank you because we have to suffer with it every month.
And equally, yeah, if you don't know how to do that, hire some trans consultants and we can answer all those questions about how best to do bathrooms in your theatres. Okay, let's see if we had... Now is the time for asking any questions in the chat if you want to, if you have anything, even if it's just nice things like tell us about some of your careers, because we love to answer happy, non-deep questions too. Until then, I have a couple more, but oh, this is an interesting one, I think from James himself. Is what are some other changes that you would like to see happen in relation to the backstage or rehearsal spaces, specifically basically spaces off stage? How can we make sure that they are more inclusive too?
I currently I'm currently working on a cast and a crew that have a lot of like non-binary people on it, and I think like this is just my opinion, but I think like being able to normalize pronoun badge wearing among both cis and trans people will really help, because especially like if you're like one of cast and you're like a cis member of cast who doesn't have to live with being trans daily, you're going to forget, or you're going to read a trans person as cis every once in a while. Like, fuck, even I do it, you know? Like, it's not like... And being able to just have pronoun badge wearing as something encouraged, and also something that isn't just the thing that the trans person does, will really, really help, I think.
And equally, if you're doing like an introduction of everyone's pronouns in the cast, get your crew involved. Like they can also sit down for 30 seconds, I'm sure, to take some time, just so, and it's also just friendly and polite. Treat crews nicely, please.
There's so many people that go into making a show, right? And like everybody deserves to be involved, and everybody deserves that kind of... We have a kind of cast familiarity that develops, because obviously when you're a cast member, you work so closely with people in a very high energy, high environment. And I think just as a little aside, be nice to your crew, be nice to your dressers, be nice to absolutely everyone, because they deserve to feel that too. They're integral to putting on your work. So, include them. And it in turn makes, gives opportunities for trans and non-binary inclusion, diversity.
Anyone else? Or we do have another question from the chat. Okie dokie. So this is a fun one from Hilmi. Are there any particular canonical MT roles that you think should be played by a trans actor who would breathe new life into the work? So who do you dream would be, who's your dream fan cast of a trans character? Trying to think now.
Personally, like, I have always wanted to play Jamie from the last 5 years. Oh God, he just has such good songs. That's all I have to say.
I want to do very trans Spring Awakening. I feel very strongly about Spring Awakening being fundamentally more trans than it is, but also doing a very trans production of Spring Awakening.
I was thinking it's funny that you mentioned last 5 years, Joy, because I always felt that kind of slight disaster, anxious spiral that Kathy has is very trans femme. Like it's very trans femme energy. And every time I listen to the score or anything, I'm always like, dang, that woman's trans. Like every time I'd like to see that.
Call us. We'll make it happen. your dreams will come true.
I've always like, for me, I'm like, there's a really, I love my obscure musicals. There's a musical called Darling, and there's a character who's basically Peter in that. And I just think he has such like, I want to play him so bad, because also Peter Pan as it is already kind of a trans friendly character, because original production, the Peter was played by a woman. So it's already got that vibe. Any final thoughts on this? Any final fan casts? Amber?
I really, really want to do a trans mask honk really badly, and I want to do it at Regent's Park and Regent's Park only, because I just feel like that needs to happen. Because I love honk. It's so silly and it's such a good family show, and I like it. And also, Tabby and I really want to do a musical of James and the Giant Peach, because obviously that is a trans story. Which is not in the existing musical theatre canon, apologies, but it deserves to be.
Someone else in the chat, Erin, has said, yes, I would love to play a non-binary Kathy too. So like, last 5 years, it's just perfect for that. I've been like struggling. I've got like a playlist on my Spotify somewhere that I'm just like, let me find it, because it's got all the songs. I'm just like, this would be great trans characters. I also want to ask, while we have a bit more time, how can we better prepare? How can drama schools improve as well for making trans-friendly environments within drama schools? Because I know when I was auditioning, I was deeply put off by how gendered it is. And I was wondering if anyone else had any advice on how we can improve that.
I have like spoken, like I've done like talkbacks with educators about like this whole topic. So I'm like, what would be my boiled down thing? And a lot of it is like privacy and respect with all students helps all the students, like not thinking about or commenting on students' bodies, like deconstructing and reimagining how you view heroes and love interests and people with like who lead shows, like will help every student in the class. Of course, I very much think like pronouns should always, like all the stuff we've discussed, but on top of that, like allow yourself to reimagine what you think is locked into this musical theater canon of how lovers look together, or what the size that people should be, or the trauma you think you should put your students through. I don't think first of all you should be doing any sort of trauma-based theater education, kind of as a rule a little bit, but then certainly without access to counseling and to healthcare and to aftercare as equal part of what you're doing in terms of that work, in terms of that heavier work. So that's what I always say. It's for all students. When I thought I was cis, I would have 1,000% benefited from my body being respected, in the way that I always kind of specify about trans people when I have these discussions. But every student's healthier for these things. The teachers are healthier for these things. The unhealthy practices that teachers went through can be changed, and that can be healing. It doesn't have to be continued.
Such an amazing point. And yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, there's little things as well, just like uniforms. If you have to wear certain ballet clothes, you can just change that. That doesn't need to be set in stone. There can be options. If you have monologue options, why make them gendered? Why do that? Just why? Also, an update from the chat. There is a James and the Giant Peach musical by Pasek and Paul. So my life has been changed today. I'm gonna Google that afterwards. We also have another question. If you want to get a group to introduce themselves using pronouns, but don't want people to feel forced to, how do you invite that, especially without wanting to feel like you're being transphobic?
So I currently do work with Showstopper, the improvised musical, and their entire thing is, this is how they do roundtable introductions. It is essentially, they say your name, and anything else you would like to tell us, including like what you do or like your pronouns, etc., etc. And then usually the first person who introduces themselves also starts with their pronouns, if they are comfortable sharing, and that kind of like leads into it. I wouldn't, that is how I've seen it done.
I'm in development with how I feel about this idea, but I think like if there's an option of just like having a name tag or having a name situation where every day you just like put your pronoun next to your name, like that way you can kind of be in charge of like, if you're not sure, if you want to try and if you're not sure if the space is safe yet, like every day when you arrive, like you can put the pronoun that you're comfortable with and feel safe with that day, and you don't necessarily need to talk about it with anyone. I think, so that's something where I've talked about more in terms of like classrooms and student safety and stuff like that. But I think there could be something there.
The way I've seen it done within my own group of at Bruford is what we tend to do is we tend to do a check-in as well. So we'll do names, pronouns, and check-in. And sometimes people's pronouns will change, but because there is that other thing of us all checking in with how we're doing emotionally, which is also just great because it means that you know how people are doing in the space. It gives people the opportunity to go, oh, without like no pressure, just being like, I'm using these pronouns today, or people to not use, like, just be like, I'm just going to focus on the check-in part of this.
I think as well, not doing away with that work after the first week if everyone uses pronouns that matches their physical appearance. For God, 7 or 8 years, I was using she, her pronouns because I knew that I was not ready to present, and I'm still not ready to present the way I want to present myself to the world. But that didn't mean that for those 7 or 8 years I wasn't non-binary. So just continuing to do that, even if it seems irrelevant, it's probably not.
The person who asked that question just says thank you so much. So clearly they've got what they need from that. We've got about 10 minutes left. Do I have any other questions that were burning? Equally, is there anything else that I feel like, is there anything that I have missed that you have wanted to say that you have burning within you that you're like, we haven't talked about this yet?
I actually have a little thing I'd like to say. When it comes to consultancy in schools, it kind of goes back to the last question in helping out school environments. Don't just have consultants come in and talk to staff, have consultants come in and talk to the students. Because it's, when I was training, it was a long time ago, a million years ago now, it was still at a time when I didn't even really know that being trans was a thing. Like, I didn't even know it was a possibility. And I think not only does it give students in this rather, let's be honest, it's quite a difficult workspace to be in for trans people, a difficult industry, and it's because all the things we've spoken about, it being very gender specific, a lot of ways it can be quite hostile. And I think just seeing a trans person maybe succeeding in the industry in whatever way that might be is really good, and just talking and just normalizing at the learner level as opposed to just at the wrinklies that are running the governors of the school or whatever. That's all great, but like, take it to the kids, because they know they need it more, and like they're going to take it more, right? Because even more than us, because they're ready to be open, they're open to new things. We're splashing out in the world now, and a lot of people know about us as a demographic, and I think they're more receptive, and I think, yeah, take it to the kids.
Yeah, on that, I am very much a believer in that drama schools are a large part of shaping the future theatrical industry, not just because they obviously bring fresh grads in who then become performers, but also that these people who train at MT are going to end up in casting, they're going to end up directing and producing. And I know that when I was auditioning for drama school, which wasn't that long ago, comparatively. There was a drama school that I went to that did a tour. I won't say who it was because I won't say who it was, but when they did the tour, that school had gender neutral and toilet, and also toilets for like different access requirements. And the guy leading the tour was like, this is the gender neutral toilet for if you're, gender neutral or an alien or whatever. And everyone just laughed. And like, just to add on to that, yeah, Jessica is entirely right. Like, you are allowed to consider finding space in your budget to have people come in and educate you on matters about transness and matters about race and queerness. And also, I would suggest from the perspective of a drama school, if you are bringing in new students, not just judging them on their hard work and their MT skills, but also for their capacity of learning more about the world and their capacity and willingness to change and to accept different viewpoints about the world. Because bringing in a class of allies, bringing in a class of people who are really, really willing to like educate themselves, not just on MT, but about people who are different from them, is really going to just be a beautiful thing for the industry at large. And honestly, it's going to make better performers. So that's my opinion.
It is not that hard to find as well. Like, we have wonderful trans consultants in this panel. I know that in the UK, Gendered Intelligence have a special package for schools for coming into teaching. So like, those resources already exist. They are there for you to utilize. And I agree with everything just said. If there's any more questions in the chat, now is also still your time. We are still taking them. And is there anything else anyone else wants to say? It can be about anything beyond this. Ooh, here we go. Another question just come in a bit late to the session. Is there a full list of the panelist names in case you want to follow people's work? Yes, do people want to do a little thing of where you can find the people? Who wants to start that? Jess, do you want to start with where we can find you?
Yeah, sure. So hello, I'm Jess. If you're interested in especially the dance side of musical theatre and dance in general, definitely check me out with my work and my consultancy. And now I'm performing again, which is crazy. Oh my goodness. Yeah, my back hates me. Yeah, so if you want to follow my work, that's fine. You can find me on Twitter at Mousey Knight. Yeah, MOUSEYKNIGHT. Yeah, check me out there and follow the crazy stuff that I'm up to.
Amazing. Joy?
Hi. Yes. I have forgotten the question in a very neurodivergent way.
Just where can we find you?
Thank you. Yes, that was it. I can be found on Twitter and Instagram at JOYT_EA. And if you are interested in seeing a play about being queer and autistic and the intersectionality between that, written by an actual autistic person, and also in a very largely neurodivergent and queer cast and crew, you can go to watch Atypical Rainbow that I'm in. It is running till the 7th of August. We opened on Friday. So there we go.
I have my tickets. I'm very excited. Yeah, coming later this week. I think, yes, later this week. Preston.
You can find me, if you so choose, at Preston Max Allen is just my handle for everything. Mostly right now, I'm just either tweeting about musicals or the state of the world. So I'm not doing much career stuff. But I have my websites to say if you want to check out any of my music or my stories. Hopefully I'll have some stuff coming up soon that's going to be public, and I hope that I have more announcements soon, but right now I don't. And otherwise, that if you ever want to listen to a musical, you should listen to We Are the Tigers, which I wrote. And if you want to do that musical, please contact me. I'm especially looking to do it with more trans people and to really work on that transposition with people who are going to be paid to help. So thank you.
And finally, Amber.
Hello. You can find me. My Twitter handle is AMBERSC51. But if you type in if you type in Amber Sinclair-Case, then I normally come up. I'm currently working on 6 at the moment in the commercial world. So if you want to come see that in town or on tour in London, or on tour, then please feel free. Let me know you're coming, and I might be there, but I'm running between 2 productions, so who knows. And also working on a play called Hungry at Soho that is written by the incomparable Chris Bush, who apparently has time to write even more plays than the amazing canon of work that she already has. So that's we open on the 13th, on the 12th of July until the 30th of July, and then we're going up to Edinburgh. Woohoo. And it's great. And that was the only question. So I don't need to do any more A's and M's.
And as for me, you can find me at Meg McGrady on most things, Instagram, Twitter. You can also find me at my website, www.megmcgrady.co.uk. I do composing, I do producing, I do photography sometimes. And yeah, that is it for now. We have finished this panel. We just want to thank you all for coming along, and just a special shout out to my guests, Jessica Allen, Amber Sinclair, Joy Tan, and Preston Max Allen. It has been an absolute pleasure.